The sound of splintering wood shattered the silence of our home at 1:12 a.m. My 13-year-old son, Luke, had been asleep on the living room couch, half covered by his favorite fleece blanket. The TV still humming with reruns of some cartoon he'd outgrown but still secretly loved. He woke to the thunderous crack of our front door flying off its hinges, the porch light flickering wildly behind the shadow of a man barreling into the hallway. Luke didn't scream. He didn't move. He did what I'd taught him to do in every emergency drill. Stay quiet, stay hidden. He scrambled low, heart hammering, into the pantry beside the kitchen and pulled the latch closed behind him. In the dark, breathing through his sleeve, he clutched the emergency alert remote from the wall, the one wired directly to my phone, and pressed it twice. I was 15 minutes into my night shift at St. Helens when my phone buzzed. 2 quick pulses, emergency code. Luke had triggered the panic button. I called immediately, but the line didn't pick up. Dread curled in my stomach. I tried again. No answer. By the third ring, I was out the door. I raced home with my hazard lights on and my badge from the hospital flapping on the dashboard, taking every red light like it was green. I didn't call the police. They were already on the way. Summoned by the silent alarm, the panic button triggered. When I pulled into our driveway, 2 sheriff cruisers lit up the street in red and blue, their lights dancing off the mailboxes and lawn flamingos that lined our HOA-mandated landscape. The air smelled like pine needles and fresh-cut grass, but all I could see was the wreckage of our door hanging sideways on its hinges and my son, blanketed, pale and shaking, sitting on the porch steps with a deputy at his side. I dropped to my knees in front of him, clutching his face, checking for bruises, wounds, something, anything. "I'm okay, Mom," he whispered, his voice paper-thin. He didn't see me. The deputy filled in the rest. A man mid-40s, clean-cut, no mask, had stormed the house wearing what looked like a tactical vest with a badge stitched on the front. He announced himself as an HOA compliance officer, shouted something about an emergency structural violation, and demanded access. When no one answered, he forced the door. He was gone before law enforcement arrived, vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only a dropped clipboard and a cheap knockoff radio. They thought it was a home invasion. I knew better. The clipboard bore the letterhead of Willow Grove's HOA, our neighborhood's overbearing ruling council. The citation paper clipped to it listed our address, my name, and a vague violation for unauthorized structural modifications. There were no such modifications. We hadn't even painted the house, but it wasn't the first time Willow Grove's HOA had crossed the line last fall. They threatened to fine me $500 for leaving our trash bins out 10 minutes past collection. 2 months later, they sent a drone to inspect our backyard for fence inconsistencies. I had reported them to the state HOA board. I had even filed a complaint. Now this. Now someone dressed like an enforcer had kicked in my front door while my son was inside and called it compliance. As the officers photographed the entryway and catalogued the broken hinges, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. The patch on the left shoulder of the vest, left behind in the scuffle. It bore the emblem of Willow Grove's HOA, exact colors, exact font, the same one on every newsletter and community signboard. When I asked the responding deputy if HOA personnel were legally allowed to conduct inspections like this, he narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "even real police can't enter a home without a warrant." Whoever this was, he wasn't law enforcement. Luke stayed quiet as we drove to the station to give his statement. He didn't ask questions, didn't cry. He just stared out the window, his fists clenched in his lap. "I thought he was going to kill me," he finally whispered. Something broke in me, then something deeper than fear. I had spent years trying to play by their rules, filing complaints, attending board meetings, writing polite emails to people who saw themselves as petty kings of cul-de-sacs. But not anymore, because tonight, someone invaded my home under the illusion of authority, and they made one fatal mistake. I thought my son was alone. They had no idea who was coming next. 2 days later, I stood outside the Willow Grove HOA office, clipboard in hand, jaw clenched so tight I could feel the pressure behind my eyes. Inside sat Cheryl Whitman, the HOA president for the last 5 years and self-appointed queen of suburban compliance. I'd emailed her twice since the break-in, no reply. Left 2 voicemails, nothing. But now I was here, in person, demanding answers. "I'm sorry," she said through pursed lips, not looking up from her laptop. "We didn't authorize any compliance visits to your property. It must have been a misunderstanding." I stared at her, stunned. "A man broke into my house." Cheryl kicked in my door while my son was inside. "He wore your HOAS uniform. He carried your paperwork. He had a badge with your seal. You're telling me that's a misunderstanding?" She finally looked up. "I understand your concern, but we don't employ field agents. We contract third-party security, and none of them reported any incident. The HOA cannot be held responsible for rogue impersonators." Her voice was smooth, corporate to smooth, like someone who'd practiced this exact speech in the mirror. I leaned forward. "Then you won't mind if I request all HOA financial records for the last year, especially payments to your so-called third-party contractors?" That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed. You're not a board member, she said, her tone sharpening. Only board members have access to financial disbursements. Actually, as a homeowner, I'm entitled to request them under the HOA Transparency Act, Section 402B. I smiled tightly. I've done my homework. She didn't reply. Instead, she stood and said, if you have any further concerns, I suggest you take it up with the board at our next public meeting. Don't worry, I said, turning toward the door. I plan to back home. Luke was quieter than usual. He spent more time in his room, sketching. Normally, he drew superhero-scapes, emblems, buildings crumbling behind masked figures. Now, he drew shadows, doors, eyes peering from under helmets. I sat beside him one evening, watching him shade in the outline of a badge. Was it him? I asked softly. He didn't look up. Yeah. Did you get a good look at his face? He nodded. I could draw it. I blinked, startled. You remember that much? Every line, he said quietly. I didn't blink. We sent the sketch to the sheriff's office. An officer stopped by the next day to tell me the image bore a striking resemblance to a man named Craig Miller. The name didn't ring any bells until I did some digging. 2 years ago, Craig Miller had been fired from Willow Grove HOA at the time. He'd been their head of compliance, a volunteer position with a taste of power and a disturbing reputation. He was known for harassing homeowners with late-night visits, towing vehicles without notice, and issuing fines for non-existent infractions. There had been complaints, but no action, until one night, Craig allegedly followed a resident home, accused her of insubordination, and tried to photograph her children through the kitchen window. He was removed from his post, quietly and without fanfare, but he still lived in the neighborhood, still had keys, still had friends on the board including Cheryl. I printed every complaint I could find online. Old Reddit threads, Nextdoor posts, Facebook screenshots, they all told the same story. A man obsessed with control, emboldened by a system that had no real oversight. So why now? Why my house? That's when I remembered. 2 months ago, I had stood up at a community meeting and accused the HOA of overreach, called their drone surveillance creepy, labeled their inspections thinly veiled intimidation. Cheryl had stared daggers at me the entire time. Was this retaliation? If so, they'd miscalculated, because I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after what Luke had endured. I filed a formal request for the HOA's security agreements, citing public safety and child endangerment. I emailed every board member with Craig Miller's name and photo, demanding answers. I started gathering neighbors' testimonies, urging them to speak out. Most were too scared. Some thanked me but asked not to be involved. But one voice stood out. I know what they did to you, the email read. They did it to me too. Let's talk. RT. I didn't recognize the name, but the initials, it belonged to someone the HOA had tried and failed to silence once before. And if I was going to bring them down, I needed someone who knew how to fight back. Raymond Torres lived in the last house on Birch Hollow, weather-beaten split level with a battered American flag on the porch and a private property no trespassing sign bolted to the fence. He answered the door in cargo pants and a navy blue shirt that said U.S. Army Retired in faded gold letters. His left hand clutched a coffee mug. His right arm bore a long scar from elbow to wrist. You're the nurse with the kid, he said before I could speak. I nodded. I'm in, he said simply, stepping aside. Inside, Ray's living room looked like a cross between a law office and a bunker. Stacks of binders lined the bookshelves, each one marked with years: 2019, 2020, 2021. HOA newsletters, meeting minutes, and financial records were sorted into labeled folders. A corkboard on the wall showed a hand-drawn flowchart of the Willow Grove board with Cheryl Whitman's name circled in red. You've been busy, I said, scanning the wall. They stole 3 years of my life, he replied. Tried to foreclose on me over a retaining wall they claimed violated aesthetic protocol. I fought back, won in court, and they buried the ruling. Most people don't know I'm the reason they had to rewrite the bylaws in 2022. Ray handed me a folder labeled Miller, Craig. Inside were complaint letters from residents, police incident reports, even a formal statement from a woman who claimed Craig tried to enter her garage under the pretense of utility inspection. He's a fanatic, Ray said, pacing. Cheryl used him when she wanted dirty work done without getting her hands messy. He went too far. They cut him loose officially but unofficially. He's still got access. He still shows up at meetings. Still files anonymous reports. I showed Ray Luke's sketch. He studied it, nodded grimly. Dead ringer. Then I told him what happened that night. The door, the badge, the panic button. Ray listened in silence, his expression hardening. With every word they crossed a line. He said finally, this isn't about HOA violations anymore. This is criminal. And Cheryl's stonewalling means she knows exactly who's behind it. What do we do? I asked. Ray cracked his knuckles. We start digging and we don't stop until the foundation breaks. The next week was war and paperwork. Ray filed a subpoena request with the county for the HOA's financial transactions related to security operations. I submitted a formal civil claim citing negligence and child endangerment. Together, We compiled testimony from 5 residents who had been targeted by Craig Miller in the past. 2 even claimed he had threatened them verbally. 1 had footage grainy but clear enough to show Craig on her property, clipboard in hand. Meanwhile, Luke worked quietly from home. He still flinched at loud noises, still kept the pantry door closed during the day. But one evening I found him drawing again, this time. A superhero with a shield shaped like a front door. "I'm calling him Break-and-Buster," he said shyly. My heart ached and swelled at the same time. Ray and I held an unofficial town hall at a neighbor's garage. We expected maybe a dozen people. Over 40 showed up. Ray laid out the timeline of Craig's offenses. I explained how the board had denied, dodged and deflected at every turn. Then I showed the citation Craig left behind, the one with digital signature. A silence settled over the room, broken only by murmurs. "They've been doing this for years," one man finally said, "but never like this." Another woman raised her hand. "What can we do?" Ray stepped forward. "We organize, we force a recall. We demand Cheryl and the board resign, and if they don't, we bury them in legal fire." The room erupted in quiet applause. We launched the petition that night. Within 3 days, we had the required signatures to trigger a recall election. On day 4, Cheryl's lawyer emailed me a cease and desist for defamation. I printed it, taped it to our shattered doorframe, and took a photo for the press. By the end of the week, the story had reached the local paper. The headline read, "Fake HOA Cop Terrorizes Teen Community Fights Back," and just like that, Willow Grove wasn't silent anymore. The Willow Grove clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, voices low with anticipation, eyes sharp with suspicion. Some had come with strollers, others with folders of evidence, but most arrived with one thing: resolve. For the first time in years, the power dynamic in our community had shifted, and the board knew it. Cheryl Whitman sat at the center of the panel table, flanked by the remaining board members. Her hair was pinned in its usual tight twist, but the confident gleam in her eyes had dulled. She wore a pressed blazer and a forced smile that cracked every time a new person stepped into the room holding a petition. Copy. Ray stood beside me, arms folded, a bulging binder tucked beneath one elbow. I gripped a small stack of photographs: Luke's sketch, the shattered front door, Craig Miller's fake badge, and a screenshot of Cheryl's signature on the compliance notice. Luke wasn't here tonight, by his own choice. He said he wouldn't need to watch it happen. "I just want to know when it's over," he'd said. "When we can lock the door and not be scared." Soon. I had promised him soon. Cheryl cleared her throat into the microphone. "We acknowledge that recent events have caused concern within the community." She began reading carefully from a prepared statement. "However, the board strongly that denies any involvement in the alleged home intrusion or association with Mr. Craig Miller, who again is not an active employee or representative of Willow Grove HOA." A man near the back scoffed loudly. Ray stepped forward, then explained why HOA funds $3,800 last quarter alone were routed through a consulting fee, paid to an LLC owned by Miller. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cheryl's jaw tightened. "Those expenditures were approved under general maintenance." "False," Ray cut in, pulling a printed ledger from his binder. "The account listed doesn't align with any maintenance vendor we've ever used. It's a shell company Miller registered 6 months after his removal. Either your board approved these payments knowingly or you failed to do your due diligence. Both are grounds for recall." I stepped up beside him. "My son hid in a pantry at 1 in the morning while a man in a stolen badge kicked down our door. He called it compliance. You call it coincidence, but we call it what it is, wrapped in authority." The room erupted, clapping, shouting, some residents demanding Cheryl step down on the spot. But the real moment came when one of the deputies who had investigated the break-in, Sheriff Deputy Rollins, walked into the room in uniform, took a seat near the front, and nodded at me. Cheryl saw him. Her hands trembled. She knew what was coming. Rollins had reopened the investigation with new evidence provided by our coalition. The email threads, the payment trail, the matching sketch Luke drew. It all pointed back to Cheryl and to Craig Miller's unauthorized access to HOA credentials and property. "I move for a vote," Ray announced. Immediate recall of the board and a motion to initiate an independent audit. Hands shot up across the room. A count was taken, and just like that, unanimous, the entire board was dissolved. Cheryl stood, shaking her head, muttering about legal overreach, but no one listened anymore. Her voice, once ironclad in Willow Grove, vanished under a wave of collective relief. She left under escort. So did 2 other board members who had quietly funneled money into the fake compliance fund. Craig Miller was arrested the following morning at his house, charged with impersonating a law enforcement officer, breaking and entering, child endangerment, and criminal trespass. The HOA property keys found in his garage sealed the case. But justice wasn't just legal, it was personal. 3 days after the hearing, a locksmith rekied every HOA access point. New elections were held. Residents voted in neighbors they trusted, school teachers, even a retired judge who'd lived here 20 years without ever attending a meeting. Until now. The new board issued a public apology to our family. The fine they once levied for the broken door voided the repair costs, reimbursed that. For Luke, he smiled when we installed the new door. This one was reinforced steel, keypad protected. He set the code himself. One night, as I tucked him in, he looked up and asked, "Is it really over?" I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. "Yeah," I said softly. "They won't hurt anyone else." He nodded, then pulled his sketchpad from under the pillow. Break and Buster was now flying, but this time, the villain wasn't just beaten, he was behind bars.